clouds of alien prime were not merely vapor. They were spun gold and violet mist, suspended in a magnetic embrace around the crystalline spires of the high city. From a distance, the capital looked less like a metropolis and more like a singular breathing organism of light and glass, floating effortlessly above the turbulent storms of the lower atmosphere. Silver towers spiraled toward the three moons, humming with the low, resonant frequency of the bioluminescent energy that powered the Sarathai civilization. Starships, elegant and silent as falling leaves, glided through the iridescent force fields that shimmered like oil on water, docking at piers made of solid diamond. It was a vision of eternal perfection, a paradise built to last until the heat death of the universe. But inside the throne hall of the Ascendant, the air tasted of ash. Queen Asera sat upon the sun throne, a high-backed seat carved from a single piece of amber that pulsed with her heartbeat. She was tall, her skin the color of polished moonlight, draped in robes of living fiber that shifted color with her mood. Currently, they were a bleak, storm gray. She stared down at the Grand Archivist, who stood trembling before the dais, clutching a data shard that glowed with a terrifying shade of red. The council chamber was vast, a circular expanse of white stone where the elite of the Sarathai court gathered. They were beautiful creatures, tall and slender, with eyes that held the depth of nebulas and skin that held an inner light. Yet, as the archivist spoke, that light seemed to dim. "The data is irrefutable. Your radiance," the archivist said, his voice thin and reedy. In the last solar cycle, across all 12 homeworlds, the successful conception rate has dropped to 0.01%. A sound like a collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen from the room. Hushed gasps rippled through the gathered nobility. Panicked whispers broke out, sharp and hissing, bouncing off the acoustic curves of the ceiling. 0.01, Asera repeated, her voice steady, though her hands gripped the arms of the throne so hard the amber grew hot. "That is effectively extinction. It is the fading," the archivist confirmed, bowing his head. "Our genetics have become too perfect, too stable. We have optimized ourselves into a dead end. Within 3 generations, the Sarathai will cease to exist." Standing in the shadow of the queen, just to the right of the throne, was Princess Lyriel. She remained perfectly still, a statue carved from ice and regret. She was arguably the most beautiful woman in the room, her features possessing a symmetry that hurt to look at, her skin luminous. Beneath her large violet eyes, delicate biolattice tattoos glowed with a soft, rhythmical blue light, marking her as royalty. But to the court, those tattoos were not marks of status. They were a brand of failure. Lyriel kept her chin high, outwardly composed, but inside she felt hollowed out by the whispers she knew were circulating. The barren princess, the end of the line, the broken heir. She had heard them all. She had endured the endless medical rituals, the genetic realignment therapies, the pitying looks from healers who told her, again and again, that her womb was dark, her code too fractured to knit a new life. She was the personification of the crisis, the most genetically advanced being in the galaxy, and utterly unable to perpetuate her own existence. "Silence the chamber," Asera commanded, raising a hand. The whispers died instantly, but the fear remained, thick and suffocating. "Dismiss the council," the queen said. "I must speak with my daughter." As the heavy doors of the throne room sealed shut, leaving them alone in the vast, echoing space, the queen's posture collapsed slightly. The regal mask slipped. She turned to look at Lyriel, her eyes filled with a desperate, terrifying calculation. We have received an offer from House Varix, Asera said, her voice echoing in the emptiness. Lord Valor believes a union between his line and ours could stabilize the public panic. It would be a gesture of continuity. Lyriel laughed, a brittle sound that shattered the solemnity. Continuity? Lyriel asked, stepping down from the dais to face her mother. Mother? I am diagnosed as totally infertile. Lord Valor is 3,000 years old and his genetic line is as stagnant as ours. You are not talking about a marriage. You are talking about a funeral procession for our dynasty. It is about hope. Lyriel, Asera snapped, standing up. The people need to see that the royal house is still functioning. They need a wedding to distract them from the fact that their nurseries are empty. I will not be a prop in your political theater, Lyriel replied, her voice cooling to absolute zero. I have given you everything. My dignity, my privacy. I let your scientists pick me apart cell by cell for 50 years. I will not shackle myself to a dusty traditionalist just to make the court feel better about our extinction. Their relationship, once warm, had fractured under the weight of duty. Asera loved her daughter, but she loved her people more, and Lyriel had become a problem to be solved rather than a child to be cherished. There is another option, Asera said softly. A gamble. Lyriel looked at her mother, seeing a glint of something dangerous in the queen's eyes. What option? Asera did not answer immediately. She turned and looked out the massive viewport toward the dark void of space beyond the force fields. We have looked for answers in our own science for a millennium, Asera whispered. Perhaps the answer lies in something baser, something with enough raw vitality to override our perfection. The scene shifted violently. The serenity of the Sarathai capital vanished, replaced by the grinding industrial scream of a human warship decelerating from hyperspace. The UNS Resolute was an ugly, blocky thing, a scarred brick of titanium and tungsten that looked like it had been chewed on by a black hole and spat back out. It did not hum. It rattled. It did not glide. It shoved its way through the vacuum. On the bridge, the lighting was harsh and fluorescent, smelling of recycled air and ozone. Captain Eli Ward sat in the command chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was a large man, built like a fortress wall, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that had seen too many things burn. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from the siege of Europa, and his right arm hummed faintly with the servos of an older generation military prosthetic. He was staring at a holographic projection of Admiral Vance, his handler from Earth Command. Let me get this straight, Eli said, his voice a gravelly baritone that carried the weight of command. You are sending me to the Crystal Palace as a diplomat? Me? Admiral, my last diplomatic mission involved a heavy railgun and an orbital drop pod. This is different. Eli, Vance said, his image flickering with the interference of the long-range transmission. The Sarathai requested a specific profile. They wanted someone with high genetic adaptability, someone who has survived extreme conditions. They want a lab rat, Eli corrected, leaning back and crossing his arms. I read the briefing. They think human DNA is chaos incarnate. They want to see if our mess of a genome can jumpstart their stalled biology. You are trading me like a stud horse. Vance, it is an alliance, Captain, Vance insisted. The Sarathai are the oldest power in the galaxy. Their technology could elevate Earth by 5 centuries overnight. If you have to play the part of a political husband to secure that, you will do it. You are a soldier. This is your mission. Eli looked around his bridge. His crew was busy, efficient, scarred. People who, like him, came from the Deathworlds. That was what the galaxy called the Sol system, a place of high gravity, volatile weather, diverse bacteria, and endless war. To the Sarathai, humans were terrifyingly tough, irrationally adaptable, and slightly insane just for existing. "Does the princess know?" Eli asked. "Does she know she is getting a grunt with a cybernetic arm and a history of violence?" "The Sarathai queen assures us the princess is amenable." Vance lied. Eli snorted. He cut the feed. He stood up, his magnetic boots clanking heavily on the deck plates. He walked to the viewport, watching the shimmering ethereal sphere of alien prime hanging in the darkness. It looked fragile, breakable, amenable. Eli muttered to himself. "I give it 5 minutes before one of us tries to kill the other." The arrival of the human delegation at the high city was a study in contrast. The Sarathai shuttle port was a masterpiece of flowing curves and silence. When the human landing craft touched down, its heavy thrusters scorched the pristine landing pad, leaving black carbon streaks on the white diamond surface. The ramp slammed down with a mechanical clang that made the gathered Sarathai dignitaries flinch. Eli walked down the ramp, flanked by 2 of his officers. He wore his dress uniform, which was crisp but utilitarian, dark blue with the gold laurels of the United Earth Navy. He refused to hide his nature. He walked with the predatory alertness of a man entering a combat zone, his eyes scanning the perimeter, the exits, the lines of sight. The Sarathai nobles parted like a stream around a boulder. They looked at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. He was so dense compared to them, so solid. He could see them whispering behind their hands, pointing at the scar on his face and the faint mechanical whine of his arm. Deathworlder. Brute. Primitive. He ignored them. He marched straight toward the throne hall of the Ascendant. Inside. The light was blinding. The walls seemed to be made of trapped starlight. At the far end, Queen Asera waited, and beside her stood the woman Eli assumed was his target. Lyriel watched the human approach. He was bigger than the hologram suggested. He moved with a heavy, dangerous grace, like a jungle cat she had once seen in a zoological archive. His mind felt shielded, opaque to her empathic senses, a wall of gray static. He was ugly, she decided, ugly and scarred and rough-hewn, like a rock dug out of the mud. Eli stopped at the foot of the dais. He did not bow low enough to be submissive, just enough to be polite. He looked up, and for the first time his eyes locked with Lyriel's. She was stunning, he had to admit, but it was a cold, sharp beauty. She looked like a diamond that would cut you if you touched it, and she looked angry. "Captain Eli Ward, of Earth," he said. "Princess Lyriel, of the Ascendant," she replied. Her voice was melodic but sharp as a scalpel. "You are late, Captain, and you have scorched the landing pad. I am told my species is messy." "Your Highness," Eli drawled, a small, dry smile touching his lips. "We tend to leave marks. I can see that," Lyriel said, her gaze dropping pointedly to the scar on his face. "Did you acquire that during a diplomatic negotiation?" "Something like that," Eli said. "The other guy disagreed with my terms. He is not around anymore." A ripple of unease went through the court. This human spoke of violence casually. "You speak with a great deal of confidence for a man who has been brought here as a biological experiment," Lyriel said, leaning forward slightly. "Do not mistake this arrangement for power, Captain. You are here because we are desperate, not because you are worthy. And you are here." "Princess," Eli shot back, his voice lowering so only she and the Queen could hear, "because your perfect empire is dying of old age, and you need a transfusion of something that actually knows how to fight for survival." Their eyes locked. It was not love at first sight. It was a collision. Sparks of hostility and curiosity flew between them. Lyriel felt a strange thrill. No one had spoken to her with such disregard for her station in a century. Eli felt a grudging respect. She wasn't a fragile flower. She was a blade. "Enough," Queen Asera said, her voice commanding. From the shadows of the colonnade, Lord Valor watched the exchange with eyes like burning coals. He was a tall, severe Sarathai with robes of crimson and gold. He leaned toward a shadowy figure beside him, an operative of the Obsidian Circle. "The Queen contaminates the royal bloodline with this beast," Valor hissed. "Look at him. He is a patchwork of meat and metal. He is a pollutant." "The experiment must not succeed," the operative whispered. "Ensure it fails," Valor commanded. "If the human biology is as volatile as they say, it should be easy to make an accident happen." The formal council session that followed was a spectacle of tension. The entire court had gathered to hear the Queen's solution to the fating. Asera stood. Her radiance flared to blinding levels, commanding attention. "My people," Asera began, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "We face the twilight of our race. Tradition has brought us peace, but it has also brought us stagnation. To survive, we must adapt. We must inject chaos into our order." She gestured to Eli, then to Lyriel. "Therefore, I have decreed a union of synthesis. I am giving my daughter, Princess Lyriel, to the human captain Eli Ward. They will travel to the Genesis outpost on the edge of the Veil Nebula. There, they will undergo proximity adaptation protocols to see if the human vitality can unlock the dormant fertility of the royal line." The gasp this time was not hushed. It was a roar of shock. "Giving." The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Lyriel felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at her mother in horror. Giving. Not marrying. Not partnering. Giving. She was being handed over like a piece of technology to be reverse-engineered. Eli stood rigid, his jaw clenched. He felt the eyes of every alien in the room on him. He felt objectified, stripped of his rank and his humanity, reduced to a sample of genetic material. He looked at Lyriel and saw the humiliation burning in her cheeks. For a second, his anger shifted from the Queen to the situation itself. They were both being used. That night, the royal quarters vibrated with the force of the argument. "You sold me," Lyriel screamed, pacing the room, her bioluminescent tattoos flaring wildly with her rage. "You stood there and told the galaxy that I am nothing more than broken machinery to be fixed by a savage." "It was necessary phrasing," Asera argued, though she looked pale. "The traditionalists needed to hear that I am in control, that he is a subject, a tool." "I am the tool. Mother," Lyriel shouted. "I am the tool you are handing to him. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? To be defined solely by the one thing I cannot do? I would rather be the last Sarathai to die alone than be treated as a lab sample." Asera's mask finally cracked. She crossed the room and grabbed Lyriel's shoulders. "Do you think this is easy for me?" Asera's voice broke. She was no longer the Queen. She was a terrified mother. "Do you think I want to send you away to a Deathworlder? But I look at the census. Lyriel, I see the empty nurseries. I see the silence waiting for us. If I do not do this, you will be the last of us. Not just the last of my line. The last, period." Lyriel stopped fighting. She saw the tears standing in her mother's eyes. "Please," Asera whispered. "Hate me if you must. But survive." Lyriel pulled away, unable to speak. She turned and fled the room, needing air, needing space. She found herself on the high balcony, a suspended platform of glass overlooking the sleeping city. The auroras were active tonight, ribbons of green and gold dancing across the sky. The beauty of it usually calmed her, but tonight it felt like a cage. A scent of burning tobacco drifted to her. She turned to see Eli standing at the far end of the balcony. He had shed his dress jacket, wearing only a gray undershirt that showed the heavy muscles of his arms and the intricate network of scars that mapped his skin. He was smoking a small, crude cylinder, a cigarette. "You are not supposed to be here," Lyriel said, though her voice lacked its usual sting. It was tired. "Your guards are terrified of me," Eli said without turning. I growled at one, and he let me walk right past. He took a drag and exhaled a cloud of smoke that looked gray and dirty against the pristine Sarathai air. "Go ahead," Eli said. "Tell me to put it out. Tell me I am polluting your perfect air." Lyriel walked over to the railing, standing a few feet away from him. "I do not care about the air," she said softly. Eli glanced at her. He saw the slump in her shoulders. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound loneliness. "That was a rough show in there," Eli said. "I have been called a lot of things in my life. Killer, grunt, monster, but breeding stock is a new one on my resume." Lyriel let out a short, bitter laugh. "At least you are the cure," she said. "I am the disease. I am the broken vessel that requires fixing." Eli turned to face her fully. He leaned his hip against the railing. "You know, on Earth, we have a saying about fixing things," he said. "If you hit it hard enough, it usually starts working again." Lyriel stared at him, horrified. "Is that your medical strategy?" Eli laughed, a low, rumbling sound that felt warm in the cool night air. "No. That is my strategy for engines and radios. For people. Usually we just buy them a drink and listen to them complain." He looked at the flask in his hand, then offered it to her. "It is whiskey," he warned. "It tastes like rocket fuel and bad decisions. It will probably kill a delicate flower like you." Lyriel looked at the flask. Then she looked at Eli. She took it. "I am not a flower, Captain," she said. She took a swig. She coughed violently, her eyes watering, her throat burning. It was horrible. It was the most real thing she had tasted in years. Eli grinned. "Not bad for an ice sculpture." Lyriel wiped her mouth, a faint flush rising in her cheeks. "And you are surprisingly conversational for livestock." They looked at each other, and for a moment, the vast cultural gap between them shrank. They were two soldiers drafted into a war they didn't want to fight. "We are both screwed, aren't we?" Lyriel asked. "Royally," Eli agreed. She laughed again, and this time, it was genuine. It changed her face, softening the sharp angles, making her look younger. Eli found himself staring at her, caught off guard by the sudden warmth. "If we are going to be exiled to this research outpost," Eli said, tossing his cigarette over the edge, "we might as well make a pact." "What kind of pact?" "We stop pretending we are doing this for them," Eli said, jerking his thumb toward the throne room. "We do it for us. We survive, we tolerate each other, and we do not let them break us." Lyriel looked at him, surprised by the fierce intensity in his voice. She nodded slowly. "Agreed. We do not let them break us." The final ceremony took place the next morning. It was the rite of binding. The court was assembled. Sarah stood on the dais, her face a mask of regal impassivity. Lord Valor watched from the side, his expression unreadable. Lyriel and Eli stood before the high priest. They did not hold hands in the human way. Instead, They extended their wrists. A heavy, intricate bracelet of living biolattice was clamped onto Lyriel's left wrist and Eli's right. The device hummed. Thin filaments extended from the metal, burrowing painlessly into their skin, linking their nervous systems on a superficial level. It was a symbol of their union, a monitoring device for the scientists, and a shackle. "I bind you," the priest intoned, "in the hope of life." Eli felt a strange, cold sensation crawl up his arm as the device activated. He glanced at Lyriel. She looked pale, but she met his gaze with a steady determination. "We do not let them break us." As the court erupted into polite, rhythmic applause, the camera focus shifted past the couple, past the queen, to the shadows of the colonnade. Lord Valor caught the eye of the Obsidian Circle agent. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The agent slipped away into the darkness, a small vial of corruption code hidden in his palm, ready to be uploaded to the Genesis Outpost's mainframe before the couple even arrived. The sabotage was already in motion. The experiment was rigged to fail before it had even begun. The Genesis Outpost hung in the void like a frantic argument frozen in metal and glass. It was suspended precariously above the rings of the gas giant Ozymandias, a swirling behemoth of violent storms and crushing gravity. The station itself was a visual schizophrenia, a jarring collision of two distinct philosophies of existence. The Serathai section was a flowing, seamless loop of pearlescent bone glass, grown rather than built, humming with a soft, musical resonance. Grafted violently onto its side was the human module, a blocky, utilitarian chunk of reinforced titanium, covered in external piping, radiator fins, and yellow caution stripes, looking like an oil rig that had been kicked into orbit. Inside, the air recyclers waged a constant war. The Serathai scrubbers tried to perfume the air with the scent of ozone and crushed lilies, while the human vents stubbornly pumped out the smell of recycled lubricants, stale coffee, and heated metal. For Captain Eli Ward and Princess Lyriel, this architectural Frankenstein was home. It had been 3 days since their arrival, and the diplomatic truce was already fraying at the edges over breakfast. Eli sat at the table in their shared common area, nursing a mug of something black and steaming. He looked tired. The artificial gravity in the human sector was set to Earth standard, which was heavy, but here in the neutral zone, it fluctuated annoyingly. "What is that smell?" Lyriel asked, gliding into the room. She looked impeccable, her skin radiating a soft morning luminescence, her biolattice tattoos chiming with a faint blue light. She stared at Eli's mug with genuine revulsion. "It is coffee, Your Highness," Eli rumbled, taking a defiant sip. "It is the fuel of my people. It tastes like burnt dirt and wakes up the central nervous system by screaming at it. It smells like chemical warfare," Lyriel said, wrinkling her nose. She moved to the synthesizer and dispensed a tube of viscous, glowing green gel. She sat opposite him and squeezed the substance onto a crystal spoon. "And that looks like something I would scrape off a hull plate," Eli countered, gesturing with his mug. "How do you eat that?" "It has the consistency of snot. It is a perfectly balanced nutrient suspension," Lyriel said primly. "It requires no chewing, produces no waste, and maintains optimal cellular regeneration. Unlike your burnt dirt, which I believe is technically a neurotoxin." "It makes me feel alive," Eli said. "It makes you jittery," Lyriel corrected. "And while we are listing grievances, Captain, we need to discuss the environmental controls. You keep lowering the temperature in the quarters to freezing. I woke up with frost on my sheets. I keep it at a comfortable 18 degrees. Eli said, "You people keep this place like a reptilian incubator. I cannot sleep when I am sweating." I cannot sleep when my metabolic functions are slowing down to hibernation levels, Lyriel snapped. And the walls, Eli interrupted, slamming his mug down a little too hard. Why are the walls in the bathroom transparent? They opacify when you signal intent, Lyriel said, looking confused. It is a safety feature, to ensure you do not collapse. I do not need the wall checking on me, Eli shouted. On Earth, we have this concept called privacy. It means I can brush my teeth without a semi-sentient wall analyzing my gum health. It is efficient. It is creepy. They glared at each other across the table, the silence stretching out, heavy and irritated. Then, unexpectedly, the absurdity of it hit them both. Here they were, the last hope of a dying empire and a scarred veteran of the Deathworlds, arguing about thermostat settings and bathroom architecture while floating above a gas giant. Eli huffed, a sound that might have been a laugh if he let it. Fine, he grumbled. I will raise the temp 2 degrees. But you have to stop the wall from watching me. I will attempt to reprogram the domestic interface, Lyriel conceded, taking a delicate bite of her green gel. But I promise nothing. The architecture finds you fascinatingly inefficient. Later that afternoon, the comedy evaporated. Eli was walking past the medical wing, a section of the station staffed by Serathi geneticists and a few human liaisons. The walls here were translucent, glowing with the soft amber light of diagnostic fields. He heard a voice, a cold, synthetic monotone, and stopped. Through the semi-transparent partition, he saw Lyriel. She was standing in the center of a scanning ring, a halo of hard light moving up and down her body. She was dressed in a thin medical gown that left her shoulders bare, exposing the intricate biolattice work that traced her spine. She looked small, smaller than he had ever seen her. Subject: Lyriel, Royal Genotype Alpha. The computer voice intoned, reproductive viability assessment complete. Result, negative. Uterine environment, hostile. Ovarian activity, dormant. Probability of successful conception, 0.00%. Eli watched Lyriel flinch. It was a small movement, a tightening of her jaw, a tremor in her hands. Repeat scan, Lyriel whispered. Scan repeated. The computer droned without hesitation. Result, negative. Diagnosis, irrevocable systematic infertility, genetic dead end. Lyriel closed her eyes. The bioluminescence under her eyes flickered and dimmed, turning a bruised, dull gray. She wrapped her arms around herself, not in a hug, but as if she were trying to hold her shattered pieces together. The arrogance she wore like armor was gone. In its place was a raw, gaping wound of shame. She was a creature bred for perfection who had failed her only biological imperative. Eli stepped away from the door, his boots silent on the floor. He felt a twist in his gut, a phantom ache in his own scars. He knew that look. He had seen it on soldiers who had lost their legs, on pilots who had been grounded. It was the look of someone who had been told they were no longer a person, but broken equipment. He waited for her in the corridor, leaning against the bulkhead, pretending to study a data pad. When she emerged 10 minutes later, she had composed herself. Her chin was high, her light restored to a hard, bright veneer, but her eyes were red. She stopped when she saw him. "How much did you see?" she asked, her voice icy. "Enough," Eli said. He did not offer pity. He knew she would hate it. "Then you know it is a waste of time," she said bitterly, starting to walk past him. "The machine does not lie. I am a dead end. We are playing house for the sake of politics. Captain, nothing more." Eli fell into step beside her. "Machines are stupid," he said. "They only measure what is there, not what could be." "And you are a geneticist now?" Lyriel scoffed. "No," Eli said, "but I am from Earth." You know why they call us Deathworlders? Because your planet tries to kill you every day. Lyriel recited the briefing. Because we refuse to die, Eli corrected. He stopped, forcing her to stop with him. He pulled up the sleeve of his uniform, revealing the junction where flesh met the metal of his prosthetic arm. The skin around the implant was a roadmap of jagged white scars, burn marks, and shrapnel pockmarks. When I was 12, Eli said, his voice dropping to a low rumble, I got caught in a kinetic bombardment during the insurrection wars. A building fell on me, literally. Crushed my right side. My lungs were collapsed, my arm was pulp, my heart stopped twice on the evac chopper. The med scanners tagged me as black tag, expectant deceased. They put me in the hallway to die so they could treat the ones who had a chance. Lyriel stared at the scars, fascinated despite herself. She reached out, her long, cool fingers hovering just above the metal. And, she asked softly, and I decided I disagreed with their diagnosis. Eli said, I crawled off that gurney and dragged myself to the surgery theater. I lived out of spite. Princess. Pure, stubborn spite. He rolled his sleeve down. Your doctors look at a chart and see a broken machine. I look at you and I see someone who is still standing. As long as you are breathing, the probability is never zero. It is just hard. Lyriel looked at him. For the first time, she did not see a brute. She saw a creature of immense, terrifying will. A man who had looked death in the face and spat in its eye. You humans are insane, she whispered, but there was no insult in it. It was almost a compliment. Yeah, Eli grinned, the expression crooked and real, but it keeps us around. The next day, the researchers ordered a neural synchronization. It was a standard Serathi procedure, usually reserved for bonded mates to align their circadian rhythms and hormonal cycles. For Eli and Lyriel, it was a requirement of the experiment. They sat in facing chairs in a dim observation room. A Serathi technician, a tall, spindly male who looked at Eli as if he were a contagious disease, attached the biofilaments to the ports on their wrist bindings. This will create a temporary bridge between your nervous systems, the technician explained, his voice bored. You will experience somatic feedback, heart rate, adrenaline, surface-level emotions. Try not to panic. Humans tend to panic. I do not panic, Eli grunted. Just flip the switch. The technician tapped a console. The world vanished in a flash of white static. Lyriel gasped. Suddenly, she was not in the chair. She was inside a cage of bone and muscle that felt heavy, dense, and hot. She felt a heart beating in her chest, not the swift, fluttering rhythm of a Serathi, but a slow, sledgehammer pounding that shook her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It was Eli's heart, and with the heartbeat came the feelings. It was not a stream of thoughts, but a tidal wave of sensation. She felt a profound, aching exhaustion, the weight of gravity pressing down on old injuries. She felt the phantom itch of a missing arm. But beneath the physical, she felt something that shocked her. Fear. Not the fear of battle, but a deep, hollow, childlike terror of being left behind, of being unlovable. She felt the memory of a cold hallway, the smell of dust and blood, the sensation of being discarded because he was broken. He feels just like me, Lyriel realized with a jolt. He is terrified that he is worthless. Across the connection, Eli gasped. He was drowning in light. He felt lightheaded, dizzy. His senses expanded to a painful degree. He could hear the hum of the electricity in the walls. He could feel the magnetic fields of the station. And he felt the shame. It tasted like ash in his mouth, a burning, corrosive self-hatred. He felt the weight of 1,000 eyes staring at him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. He felt the crushing pressure of a crown he could never truly wear. She isn't an ice queen, Eli thought, reeling. She is drowning. Terminate sync. The technician's voice came from far away. Heart rates are destabilizing. The connection snapped. Eli and Lyriel slumped back in their chairs, gasping for air, sweat beading on their foreheads. The room was silent except for the frantic beeping of the monitors. They stared at each other. The walls were down. The masks were gone. They had seen the naked, trembling things hidden inside each other's souls. Lyriel's hand shook as she reached up to touch her temple. Eli stared at her, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "You," Lyriel whispered. "You were that boy in the hallway." "And you," Eli rasped, wiping sweat from his lip. "You really believe it? You think you are nothing but a defective part?" They did not speak for the rest of the day. The intimacy of it was too much, too sudden. It was more intimate than sex, more exposing than nudity. They retreated to their separate corners of the quarters, but the silence was no longer hostile. It was charged. While the couple grappled with their new connection, the conspiracy turned its gears in the dark. Deep within the station's server core, a Sarathai researcher named Kalen inserted a data shard into the mainframe. Kalen was a loyalist to House Valor, a traditionalist who believed the human taint would doom his species. The shard carried a payload of corruption algorithms. It would not destroy the data, that would be too obvious. Instead, it would subtly alter the readouts of the fertility experiments. It would introduce micro-errors, false negatives, and simulation crashes. It would paint a picture of total biological incompatibility. "It is done, my lord," Kalen whispered into an encrypted comlink. "The data will show that the human DNA is toxic to the royal genome. The queen will have no choice but to recall the princess." "Good," Valor's voice hissed back, distorted by distance. "And the human will be frustrated. Accidents happen when tempers flare." On the other side of the station, inside the human comms array, Eli's personal console chimed with a priority text channel. It was Admiral Vance. "Update requested. Command grows impatient. We need confirmed viable tissue samples. Remember, Captain, the asset belongs to Earth. If a hybrid is created, we need to secure custody before the Sarathai realize what they have." Eli deleted the message. He stared at the blank screen, his jaw working. Asset. They were talking about a child, his child. He felt a sudden surge of protective fury that surprised him. He was being squeezed from both sides. The Sarathai wanted him to fail, and Earth wanted him to succeed so they could steal the result. He looked at the closed door of Lyriel's room. "We do not let them break us." 2 days later, the tension needed a physical outlet. They met in the Zero-G gymnasium, a spherical chamber at the core of the station where gravity was nullified. It was the only place they were physically equal. In gravity, Eli's mass and muscle gave him the advantage. Here, Lyriel's grace and Sarathai's spatial awareness made her a predator. They were sparring, not fighting, but moving through a high-speed obstacle course of floating geometric shapes. "On your left, Captain," Lyriel called out, pushing off a tetrahedron and spiraling past him. Eli grunted, grabbing a handhold and swinging his heavy frame around. Too slow. "Princess." He launched himself across the gap, intercepting her trajectory. They were supposed to be training reflexes, but it had turned into a game of tag. Lyriel laughed, a bright sound that echoed in the sphere. She twisted mid-air, her body flexible as a ribbon, avoiding his grasp. But she miscalculated his reach. Eli's prosthetic hand, faster than his organic one, snagged her ankle. "Gotcha!" Momentum took over. He pulled, she spun, and they crashed into the padded wall of the sphere. They landed in a tangle of limbs, breathing hard, pinned against the padding by their own inertia. Eli's arm was braced next to Lyriel's head. Her legs were bracketed by his. They were pressed chest to chest, the fabric of their training suits thin enough that Eli could feel the cool temperature of her skin, and she could feel the furnace heat of his. The laughter died in their throats. Lyriel looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, the violet irises swirling with gold flecks. Her lips were parted slightly. She smelled of ozone and something floral, like night-blooming jasmine. Eli looked down. He saw the pulse fluttering in her throat. He saw the sweat glistening on her collarbone. The air in the gym seemed to vanish. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. They were not two diplomats anymore. They were two bodies in space, drawn together by a gravity of their own making. Eli, Lyriel whispered. It was the first time she had used his name without a title or an insult. Eli's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was so strong it made his hands shake. He wanted to bridge the gap, to prove that fire and ice could touch without destroying each other. But the fear held him back, the fear he had felt in the sink, the fear that he was just a brute and she was a princess. And this was a mistake. He pushed off the wall, floating backward, putting distance between them. Drill over, he said, his voice rough and uneven. You win this round. Lyriel stayed against the wall, watching him float away. She touched her lips, her heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with exercise. That evening, Ozymandias decided to scream. A massive solar flare from the system's primary star slammed into the gas giant's magnetosphere. The radiation wave hit the Genesis outpost like a tsunami. The lights died instantly. The hum of the gravity deck ceased. The station groaned as the shields flared to maximum, diverting all power to structural integrity. Eli and Lyriel were in the main observation lounge when it happened. The sudden darkness was absolute, save for the ghostly pale blue light of the storms raging on the planet below, filtering through the blast shutters. And then, Lyriel lit up. Her biolattice tattoos flared brilliant sapphire and emerald, casting a soft underwater glow across the room. Her skin seemed to shimmer. She was a living lantern in the dark. Well, Eli said from the shadows of the couch, that is handy. I usually have to carry a flashlight. Lyriel smiled, walking over to sit beside him. The emergency heating was off, and the room was rapidly cooling. She sat close, seeking his warmth. It is a biological stress response, she explained softly. We glow when we are frightened or excited. Are you frightened? Eli asked. Not anymore, she answered. They sat in the quiet, bathed in her light and the chaotic swirling colors of the gas giant outside. The comms were down. The spies were blind. The data recorders were offline. For the first time, they were truly alone. Tell me a joke, Lyriel said suddenly. A human joke, Eli chuckled. Okay. A Sarathai, a human, and a silicon-based life form walk into a bar. He told her a terrible, dry joke about interspecies diplomacy. She laughed. Then she told him a Sarathai parable that was meant to be profound but sounded hilarious when translated literally. They talked for hours. They talked about the things that didn't matter, which meant they were talking about everything that did. You know, Lyriel said, tracing a pattern on the arm of the couch. I felt you pull away in the gym. Eli stiffened. I did not want to cross a line. What line? Lyriel turned to him, her glowing face inches from his. The line the Queen drew. The line Earth Command drew. The line where I am a monster and you are a masterpiece, Eli said quietly. I did not want to break you. Lyriel reached out and took his hand, the metal one. She laced her fingers through the cold steel digits. You cannot break me, Eli. I have been broken by experts. My mother, the doctors, the court. They broke me down to a diagnosis. She looked into his eyes, her gaze fierce and pleading. I am tired of being a symbol, she whispered. I am tired of being the infertile princess. And I know you are tired of being the Deathworld soldier. She moved closer, sliding into his personal space, wrapping her warmth around him. We are alone. Eli, the cameras are off. The universe is looking the other way. What are you saying? Eli asked, his voice hoarse. I am suggesting that for tonight, we stop being an experiment, she said. We stop trying to save the galaxy. We just be two people who want each other. She paused, searching his face. Unless you do not want me. Eli made a sound deep in his throat, a growl of surrender. He reached out with his flesh hand and cupped her face. His thumb traced the glowing lattice under her eye. I have wanted you since you insulted my coffee, he murmured. Lyriel let out a shaky breath, a sound of relief and desire. Then prove it. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative. It was an explosion. It was the collision of two worlds that had been orbiting each other, waiting for gravity to win. Eli tasted like coffee and smoke and something uniquely, fiercely human. Lyriel tasted like ozone and sweetness. The sensation was overwhelming. They moved together, a tangle of limbs and desperation. The physical act was not a clinical coupling for reproduction. It was a rebellion. It was a rejection of the data, the charts, the expectations. Eli treated her not like porcelain, but like she was the only real thing in the universe. He worshipped the light in her skin, the strength in her spine, and Lyriel, for the first time in her century of life, felt cherished, not for her title, not for her genetic potential, but for the woman beneath the tattoos. She felt his scars under her hands, the rough topography of his survival, and she loved every ridge. She pulled him closer, wrapping her legs around him, anchoring him to her. It was terrifying. It was sacred. It was a falling sensation, a plunge into a deep, dark ocean where only the two of them could breathe. As they lay together in the aftermath, the station's power began to flicker back online. The hum of the ventilation returned. Lyriel lay with her head on Eli's chest, listening to the heavy, steady thud of his heart. She was trembling, her light pulsing in a slow, contented rhythm. Eli stroked her hair, his metal hand surprisingly gentle. You okay? He asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. Lyriel closed her eyes. I am afraid, she admitted. Of what? Of tomorrow. When the lights come back on. When we have to go back to being tools. Eli tightened his arm around her. No, he said firmly. We do not go back. We change the rules. Lyriel, whatever happens, even if the doctors are right and there is no child, nobody can take this back. This is ours. Lyriel looked up at him. Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled. Ours, she repeated. She realized then that she didn't care about the throne. She didn't care about the legacy. She wanted this. She wanted life. She wanted the messy, hot, complicated reality of being with this impossible human. Deep in the station's laboratory, the automated systems rebooted. The corrupted algorithms injected by Kalen surged back to life, scrubbing the incoming data from the biometric sensors in the royal quarters. On the main console, a report generated. Subjects: Eli Lyriel, interaction confirmed, conception. Probability 0.00%. Status failure. The file was encrypted and burst transmitted to the capital, destined for Lord Valor's personal terminal, but in the bottom corner of the diagnostic screen, unnoticed by the rebooting AI and buried beneath the layers of sabotage, a single pixel of data blinked red. It was an anomaly, a cellular vibration in Lyriel's lower abdomen, a frequency that defied Sarathai biology and human physics alike. It was a tiny, impossible spark. The screen flickered. The anomaly vanished from the display, hidden by the corruption. The transmission was sent. The lie was told. But in the dark, the spark remained. The weeks that followed the blackout were a strange, suspended season of calm. The Genesis outpost, once a prison of awkward silences, had transformed into a domestic bubble floating above the violet storms of Ozymandias. The corridors no longer echoed with arguments about thermostat settings. Instead, they hummed with a quiet, terrified contentment. But the biology of a Sarathai was a precise instrument, and Lyriel knew her instrument was drifting out of tune. It started with the heat. For 3 days. Lyriel felt a persistent low-grade fever simmering beneath her skin. It was not the cold, clinical fever of a virus, but a rich, radiant warmth that seemed to emanate from her very marrow. Her biolattice tattoos, usually a cool sapphire blue, began to shift. They flickered with threads of gold and deep amber, colors reserved for high-energy casting or extreme emotional states. Yet she was doing nothing but sitting at the breakfast table. Then came the dizziness. Lyriel stood up to recycle her nutrient tube and the gravity deck seemed to lurch sideways. The room spun. The floor rushed up to meet her. She would have hit the metal plating if not for a heavy, mechanical arm catching her by the waist. "Whoa," Eli grunted, hoisting her back to her feet with effortless strength. "Easy there, Your Highness. You are listing to port." "I am fine," Lyriel insisted, though her voice sounded thin and distant to her own ears. "It is just the atmospheric pressure. The stabilizers must be fluctuating again." Eli did not let go. He maneuvered her back to the chair and pressed her down, his flesh hand resting on her forehead. "You are burning up," he said, his brow furrowed, "and you are glowing like a solar flare. I need sunglasses just to look at you." "It is a metabolic adjustment," she lied, batting his hand away. "Stop hovering." "I am not hovering," Eli said, crossing his arms. "I am observing. It is what we apex predators do." "You are fussing," Lyriel corrected. "You are behaving like an overprotective Deathworld mammal guarding its territory. It is undignified." Eli grinned, but the worry in his eyes remained sharp. "Better a fussing mammal than an unconscious princess," he countered. "You are eating real food today, Lyriel. No more green slime. I am making you protein toast, and you are going to drink water. Not that electrolyte fizz you like." "I do not want toast," she groaned, closing her eyes as the room tilted again. "Too bad," Eli said, moving to the synthesizer. "You look like you are about to phase out of existence. Sit. Stay. Do not make me get the leash." Lyriel rolled her eyes, but she did not argue. She leaned her head back, watching him bustle around the small kitchenette. He moved with a clattering, noisy efficiency that used to drive her mad. But now, the sound of him was the only thing anchoring her to the world. She pressed a hand to her stomach. The warmth was centered there, a tiny, rhythmic pulse that felt like a second heartbeat, but far too fast, far too faint. "Stress," she told herself. "It is just the after effects of the neural sync. It is just hope playing tricks on a broken mind." While Lyriel battled her symptoms in the deep void, the machinery of the Sarathai Empire ground on in the capital. Lord Valor stood before the sun throne, his posture radiating triumphant sorrow. He held a data crystal in his hand, letting the light of the chamber fracture through it. The reports are conclusive. Your radiance, Valor said, his voice smooth as oil. We have analyzed the biometric data from the Genesis outpost for 6 weeks. There has been no successful integration. The human genetic material is too chaotic. It rejects the Sarathai matrix instantly. Queen Asera sat frozen on her throne. She looked older than she had a month ago. The light of her skin was dim, her robes hanging heavy on her frame. Are you certain? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Is there no margin for error? None, Valor lied. The data has been triple-checked by the High Science Council. The experiment is a failure. My queen, the princess, is enduring this humiliation for nothing. Asera closed her eyes. A murmur of agreement swept through the council chamber. She could feel the weight of their disappointment. She had gambled her daughter's dignity and lost. Bring her home, Asera said, the command tasting like ash. Terminate the project. We will look for other ways. As Valor bowed low to hide the smile curling his lips, the scene shifted to a world of concrete and rain. Earth, in a windowless boardroom deep beneath the Swiss Alps, the air was cold and recycled. A group of 5 people sat around a mahogany table. They wore expensive suits and the impassive expressions of people who decided who lived and died. Director Holloway, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes like flint, tapped a finger on a tablet. The Sarathai are going to recall the asset. The intelligence officer standing at the end of the table said, he was a nondescript man, the kind you would forget the moment he left the room. And the results? Holloway asked. Official channels say negative, the officer replied. But our deep plant telemetry suggests anomalies. The energy signatures coming from the princess are inconsistent with baseline physiology. Holloway leaned forward. If there is even a 1% chance that she is carrying a hybrid, she said, her voice hard. We cannot let the Sarathai keep it. An immortal empire with the vitality of humanity? They would be unstoppable. They would never need us again. What are your orders, Director? If the experiment was a success, the officer said, the result belongs to Earth. We need to secure the assets. Both of them, if the Sarathai refuse to hand them over. Well, accidents happen in deep space every day. Back on the outpost, the denial finally broke. Lyriel was in the bathroom staring at her reflection. The bioluminescence on her face had shifted again, turning a deep, rich violet. She felt a wave of nausea so potent it brought her to her knees. Eli found her there a moment later. He didn't say a word. He just scooped her up and carried her out of the quarters. Put me down, she whispered weakly. We are going to the med bay, Eli said, his voice grim. And you are not arguing. I hate the med bay, she said, burying her face in his shoulder. I know, Eli said, but something is wrong, Leary, and I am not going to watch you burn out. The medical sector was quiet. The Sarathai researchers had largely withdrawn to their own quarters, leaving the automated systems running. But the lead researcher, a neutral scientist named Dr. Solus, was still at his station. He looked up as Eli kicked the door open, carrying the Princess of the Ascendant like a wounded soldier. Prepare the diagnostic ring, Eli barked. Full spectrum scan, now. Doctor, Solus blinked, startled by the human's aggression, but he saw the color of Lyriel's skin and moved instantly. Place her on the platform, Solus instructed, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Eli set her down gently. Lyriel shivered as the cold light of the scanner washed over her. She gripped Eli's hand, her knuckles white. "Just tell me it is a virus," she whispered to him. "Tell me I am sick. Do not tell me I am broken again." Eli squeezed her hand. "You are not broken." The scanner hummed, a rising pitch that set Lyriel's teeth on edge. Holographic layers of her anatomy peeled away in the air above her. Skeleton, nervous system, biolattice network. Dr. Solus watched the data stream, his expression bored. Subject is experiencing severe hormonal fluctuations. Solus muttered, "Likely a rejection of the human pheromones. I see elevated cortisol. Elevated." He stopped. The hum of the machine seemed to drop an octave. "Dr. Solus froze. He leaned closer to the hologram, his eyes widening until they were perfect circles of shock. He tapped a command, zooming the projection into the lower abdomen. "That is impossible," Solus whispered. "What?" Eli demanded, stepping forward. "What is it?" Solus did not answer. He was staring at a tiny rhythmic pulse of light in the center of the dark void of Lyriel's womb. It was faint, barely a flicker, but it was undeniable. It was surrounded by a shielding of gold bioenergy that Lyriel's body had created unconsciously. "There," Solus said, his voice shaking. Lyriel looked up. She saw the pulse. "It is a tumor?" she asked, her voice cracking. "No," Solus said. He looked at Lyriel, then at Eli, as if seeing them for the first time. "It is a heartbeat." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the station. Lyriel sat up. She stared at the hologram. The tiny speck of light pulsed again. Thump, thump. "You are pregnant, Highness," Solus said, the words defying every law of science he knew. Lyriel staggered off the table. Her legs gave out, but Eli was there. He caught her, pulling her against his chest. "No," she gasped, tears blurring her vision. "The reports, they said 0. They said dead end. Life finds a way," Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He was shaking. He looked at the screen, then buried his face in her hair. "You did it, Lyri. I am not broken." Lyriel sobbed, the words tearing out of her throat. "I am not broken. I am not broken." She laughed, a wet, hysterical sound, and buried her face in Eli's shirt. He held her tight, rocking her back and forth, while the Sarathai scientist stared at the screen, realizing that everything he knew about biology had just been rewritten. Later, in the quiet of their quarters, the reality set in. Lyriel sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. The glow of her tattoos had settled into a steady, warm gold. "I always wanted this," she confessed softly. "I never told anyone, not even my mother. I pretended I was above it, that I only cared about duty. But every time I saw a child in the crystal gardens, I felt like I was dying." Eli sat beside her. He looked at his hands, one flesh, one metal. "I never thought about it," he admitted. "Soldiers do not think about legacy. We think about surviving the week." He looked at her, his expression vulnerable. "I have killed so many people. Lyriel, I have destroyed things. The idea that I helped make something, a life." He reached out and touched her stomach. His metal fingers were cold, but his touch was reverent. "It terrifies me," he said. "It should," Lyriel said, covering his hand with hers. "Think of what this child is. Half Sarathai, half human, an heir to the throne and a child of the Deathworlds. They will be the most valuable thing in the galaxy. And the most dangerous," Eli added. "Earth will want it. Your mother's enemies will want it." Lyriel looked at him, her eyes fierce. "Then let them come," she said. "I am not giving this up, not to the Queen, not to Earth, not to anyone." Eli kissed her forehead. "We are going to need a bigger gun," he murmured. The moment of peace was shattered by the ping of a transmission. In the lab, Dr. Solis had packaged the scan data. He was a scientist, not a conspirator. He believed the Queen needed to know. He sent the packet. Priority 1. Confirmed gestation. Hybrid viable. But the message never reached the Queen. It was intercepted by a filter program in the station's comms array, rerouted instantly to a private server on a heavy cruiser lurking in the system's asteroid belt. On the bridge of the cruiser Vengeance, Lord Valor read the intercept, his face twisted into a mask of pure revulsion. "It is real," he hissed. "The abomination exists." "Sanitize the outpost," Valor ordered the mercenary captain standing beside him. "Leave no witnesses. Blame it on a human reactor malfunction." The attack did not begin with a warning. It began with the screaming of metal. A concussion missile slammed into the docking ring of the Genesis outpost. The station shuddered violently, throwing Lyriel and Eli to the floor. The lights died, replaced instantly by the strobing red of emergency klaxons. "Hull breach in Sector 4, the automated voice shrieked. "Decompression imminent." "They are here," Eli said, rolling to his feet and pulling Lyriel up. "Who?" "Everyone," Eli growled. He grabbed a heavy kinetic pistol from his locker and tossed a sleek Serathai energy blade hilt to Lyriel. They ran. The corridors were a chaos of smoke and sparking conduits. Gravity fluctuated wildly, sending them bouncing off the walls. They reached the junction leading to the hangar bay just as the airlock blew inward. Mercenaries in heavy void armor stormed through the smoke. They were not using stunners. They were using plasma rifles. "Move!" Eli roared. He opened fire. His pistol boomed like a cannon in the confined space, the heavy slugs tearing through the mercenaries' armor. He fought with brutal, efficient economy. A shoulder check to shatter a helmet. A point-blank shot to the chest. A ruthless kick to a knee. Lyriel moved like water. She activated the energy blade, a ribbon of violet plasma springing to life. She did not hack. She flowed. She ducked under a plasma bolt, spun, and sliced through the barrel of a mercenary's rifle. She used the zero-gravity fluctuations to her advantage, running along the wall and striking from above. It was a dance of death. The brute force of Earth and the lethal grace of the Serathai, working in perfect tandem. "We need to get to the shuttle," Eli shouted over the roar of combat. They pushed forward, fighting inch by bloody inch. They were 10 meters from the hangar doors when a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. It was a saboteur, a Serathai assassin cloaked in stealth fields. He dropped behind Lyriel, a monomolecular dagger in his hand. He did not aim for her throat. He aimed for her stomach. Eli saw the shimmer of the stealth field. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He launched himself across the corridor. "No!" Eli slammed into the assassin, shoving him away from Lyriel. The dagger plunged down. It missed Lyriel, but it found Eli. The blade sank deep into his shoulder, grinding against the metal of his prosthetic mount and shearing through muscle and artery. Eli roared, a sound of pure animal rage. He grabbed the assassin's head with his metal hand and crushed it against the bulkhead. The assassin slumped, lifeless. Eli dropped to one knee, blood spraying from the wound, coating his arm and the floor. "Eli!" Lyriel screamed. She was there in an instant, her hands glowing with healing light. But the wound was deep and the weapon had been poisoned. "Go!" Eli gasped, trying to push her toward the hangar. "Get to the ship." "I am not leaving you," Lyriel snarled. She grabbed him by his good arm. She was smaller than him, but adrenaline and hybrid bioenergy surged through her. She hauled him up, taking his weight. "Walk, damn you," she commanded. They stumbled into the hangar. It was in flames. The main transport was destroyed, a wreck of twisted metal. Only one ship remained, a small, short-range research shuttle, barely big enough for a pilot and a scanner operator. Lyriel dragged Eli up the ramp. He was gray, his eyes losing focus. She threw him into the co-pilot seat and strapped him in. She jumped into the pilot's chair, her hands flew across the controls. She didn't know human interfaces well, but the shuttle was a hybrid design. She synced her biolattice to the nav computer. "Launch!" she screamed at the system. The clamps released. The shuttle shot out of the bay just as a second missile obliterated the hangar. The shockwave sent them tumbling into the void. The shuttle spun, the G-force pressing them into their seats. Lyriel fought the stick, stabilizing the craft as they streaked away from the dying station and the gas giant's rings. She engaged the FTL drive. Red lights flashed. Nav system damaged. Coordinates corrupted. "I do not care," Lyriel yelled. "Just go!" She punched the engage button. The stars stretched into lines of light, and they vanished into the slipstream. Silence returned, but it was the silence of a tomb. Lyriel unbuckled and scrambled to Eli. He was conscious, but barely. His blood was pooling on the deck plates. She ripped a strip of fabric from her tunic and pressed it to the wound. Her hands glowed fiercely, pouring every ounce of her energy into staunching the flow. "Hey!" Eli wheezed, his voice bubbling. "Hush!" Lyriel ordered, tears streaming down her face. "Save your strength. This is, a hell of a romantic getaway," he managed to whisper, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. "You idiot!" Lyriel sobbed, pressing harder. "You absolute idiot. You jumped in front of a blade and he was aiming for the kid," Eli rasped. "No one." "Touches the kid." Lyriel froze. She looked at his battered face, the scar, the blood. He had almost died for a concept. For a heartbeat he had only seen as a hologram. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, her light mingling with his blood. "We are safe," she whispered fiercely. "We are away, and I promise you, Eli Ward, this child will not be born in chains. We will burn the whole galaxy down first, far away, in the high city of Alien Prime." Queen Sarah sat alone in her chambers. The official report lay on her desk. Genesis outpost destroyed. Catastrophic reactor failure. Human negligence suspected. No survivors. It was a clean story. A tragic accident. Sarah stared at the words. She picked up the data pad. Her thumb traced the seal of House Valor at the bottom. She remembered the look in Lyriel's eyes before she left. She remembered the fierce intelligence of the human captain. "Reactor failure," Sarah murmured. She stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the stars. She was a queen, and she knew the taste of a lie. She clenched her hand on the armrest of her chair, her knuckles turning white. "They are not dead," she whispered to the empty room. She turned back to her desk and opened a secure, encrypted channel, one that bypassed the council entirely. "Commander," she said to the holographic figure that appeared, "prepare the Dawn Treader. Quietly. I have lost my daughter, and I am going to find her. The research shuttle, now named the Stray by its battered captain, limped out of hyperspace and drifted toward the free port of Xylos. The station was a scar on the face of the sector, a sprawling, chaotic ring of rusted hulls, improvised habitats, and neon-drenched markets hanging precariously in the orbit of a blue-white ice planet. It was a place where the laws of the Sarathai Empire and the United Earth Coalition went to die, replaced by the only currency that mattered, credits and silence. Eli Ward sat in the pilot's seat, wincing as he adjusted the thrusters. His shoulder was bandaged, the healing nanites doing their slow work. but the ache was a constant reminder of their escape. He looked over at Lyriel. She was asleep in the co-pilot's chair, wrapped in a rough gray blanket they had scavenged from the shuttle's emergency locker. In the dim light of the cockpit, the changes in her were undeniable. It had been less than a month since the conception, yet the curve of her abdomen was pronounced, swelling with a speed that defied every biological constant he knew. The biolattice tattoos that usually traced her cheekbones had migrated. They now swirled around her midsection, forming a protective, glowing cradle of intricate gold light that pulsed in time with two distinct rhythms. Lyriel shifted, opening her eyes. They were bright, too bright, feverish with the immense energy consumption of her body. "We are here?" she asked, her voice rasping slightly. Eli nodded. "Xylos, the armpit of the galaxy. If anyone is looking for a runaway princess, this is the last place they will check. It smells too much like desperation." Lyriel sat up, the blanket falling away. She placed a hand on the golden light of her stomach. "He is active today," she murmured. "Or she. It feels like they are trying to remodel the furniture in there. It is fast." "Lyriel," Eli said, his voice tight with worry. "Too fast. Human gestation takes 9 months. You look like you are halfway there in 3 weeks." Lyriel managed a dry, tired smile. "You said humans were adaptable, Captain. Our child is just overachieving. It is very efficient." Eli reached out, his flesh hand hovering over the glow. He was terrified to touch it, terrified that his calloused, war-stained hands would somehow corrupt the miracle growing inside her. But Lyriel took his hand and pressed it against the warmth. He felt a kick, strong, definite. "It is not just efficiency," Eli whispered, awe warring with fear. "It is power. We need supplies," Lyriel said, breaking the moment before it became too heavy. "And I need food. Real food. If I have to eat another ration bar, I might declare war on this ship." They docked in a bay that smelled of sulfur and frying oil. They moved through the station with their heads down. Eli wore a heavy spacer's coat with the collar turned up to hide his scars. Lyriel was draped in a shapeless cloak, a heavy hood obscuring her glowing features. The market deck of Xylos was a sensory assault. Holographic advertisements for illicit tech and cheap liquor screamed in a dozen languages. Bizarre aliens, multi-limbed mechanics, methane-breathing traders in enviro suits, and rough human mercenaries jostled through the narrow, steam-filled alleys. Eli kept Lyriel tucked close to his side, his body a shield. His eyes scanned every face, every shadow, looking for the telltale shimmer of a Serathai agent or the tactical precision of an Earth hit squad. They found a canteen tucked into the bowels of the station, a place with flickering lights and sticky floors. The cook was a human, a massive man with a grease-stained apron and a cybernetic eye that whirred as it focused. Eli approached the counter, leaving Lyriel at a corner table in the shadows. "What do you want?" The cook grunted. "We got soy paste, rat skewers, or sludge. I need protein," Eli said, leaning on the counter. "High grade and calcium, and something with iron that does not taste like rust." The cook laughed, a wet hacking sound. "Does this look like a health spa? Spacer? You eat what I got." "My wife is pregnant," Eli said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "And she is Serathai. She needs clean organics, not soy paste, not sludge. Do you have eggs? Real ones?" The cook stopped laughing. He looked at Eli, really looked at him, noting the military bearing and the way Eli's hand rested near the hidden pistol in his coat. "Serathai, huh?" the cook muttered. "That is a delicate stomach to be feeding in a dump like this." She is eating for two, Eli said, and if she does not get what she needs, I am going to be very unhappy. And when I am unhappy, things tend to break. The cook held his gaze for a second, then grunted and turned away. I got a crate of avian eggs from Proxima. Real ones. Cost you 50 credits. Done. Minutes later, Eli returned to the table with a plate of scrambled eggs and a glass of actual milk. He set it down before Lyriel like it was a royal banquet. Eat, he commanded. Lyriel looked at the food, then at Eli. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he watched the door, the way he had bullied a stranger just to get her breakfast. You are ridiculous, she said softly, picking up a fork. I am mission-focused, Eli corrected. You threatened him, didn't you? I negotiated aggressively. Lyriel took a bite. It was greasy and salty, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She watched Eli watching her, his eyes tracking every forkful as if he were personally fueling her. Thank you, she whispered. Eli just nodded, but his hand found hers under the table, squeezing tight. After the meal, they sought out the contact the Loyalist crew had given them before they fled the outpost. Deep in the station's lower levels, past the hum of the reactor cores, they found a door marked with a subtle, scratched symbol, the Sarathai glyph for outcast. The door hissed open to reveal a small, cluttered room filled with bioluminescent plants and ancient data scrolls. An old Sarathai sat amidst the greenery. His skin was faded, his light dim, marking him as an exile cut off from the communal energy of the homeworld. This was Elder Kale, a healer banished decades ago for suggesting that the Sarathai genome was stagnating. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening as they landed on Lyriel's stomach. By the Ascendant, Kale breathed, standing up with trembling grace. It is true. He rushed forward, ignoring formalities, and placed his hands near the golden glow of Lyriel's abdomen. He closed his eyes, sensing the biorhythms. Chaos and order, Kale whispered. Fire and ice. It is rewriting everything. What do you mean? Lyriel asked, fear spiking in her chest. Is the child healthy? Healthy? Kale laughed, a dry, dusty sound. Highness, this child is not just healthy, it is a key. He pulled back a holographic chart, showing a complex double helix structure that was unraveling and reknitting itself. The Sarathai infertility was not natural evolution, Kyle explained, his voice grim. We did not just fade. We were locked. Someone inserted a genetic dampener into the royal bloodline generations ago, a biological kill switch to keep our population controlled. Lyriel froze. Controlled? By whom? But this child. Kale pointed to the glowing center of the hologram. The human DNA is smashing through the dampener. It is aggressive. It is tearing down the walls. Your child is not just an heir. Princess, it is the cure. If this genetic pattern is shared, it could unlock the fertility of our entire species. Eli felt a chill go down his spine. That is why they want us dead, he realized. It is not just about purity, it is about control. If the Sarathai start breeding again, the balance of power shifts. Exactly, Kale said. You are carrying a revolution in your womb. While the revelation settled in the dark of Xylos, the truth was beginning to surface in the light of the Sarathai capital. Queen Sarah had not slept in 3 days. She sat in her private sanctum, surrounded by floating screens of data she had pulled from the encrypted archives of the Genesis outpost. The official report said reactor failure. But Sarah had found the ghost in the machine, a fragment of a transmission that had been intercepted and deleted. She played it for the 100th time. It was a biometric scan. Subject, Lyriel. Status, Gestation confirmed? Her daughter was alive, her daughter was pregnant, and her counsel had tried to kill her. Sarah stood, and for the first time in centuries, the light of her skin burned with a terrifying red-gold heat. It was the color of a star going supernova. They lied to me, she whispered to the empty room. They tried to murder my bloodline. She did not summon the guards. She did not call a session. She knew now that the rot went deep. Lord Valor was not just a traditionalist, he was a traitor. She opened a secure channel to the hangars of the Royal Guard. Captain Valerius, Sarah said, her voice like cold iron. Prepare the Dawn Treader. Handpick a crew of only those who were bonded to my house before the Valor ascendancy. We are leaving within the hour. Where are we going? Your Radiance? The captain asked. To find my grandchildren, Sarah said, and to burn anyone who stands in our way. Simultaneously, on Earth, the conspiracy was moving with cold, bureaucratic efficiency. In the sub-basement of the United Earth Intelligence Building, Director Holloway watched a satellite feed from deep space. A faint, unique energy signature had been detected in the Xylos sector. It matched the hybrid profile. We have them, an analyst said. They are on Xylos. Deploy the retrieval team. Holloway ordered. Black Ops. No insignias. Use the experimental dampeners. I want the parents neutralized, but the carrier must be taken alive. If the Serathi get that baby, we lose our leverage. Back on Xylos, night had fallen, or at least the station's artificial cycle had dimmed the lights. Eli and Lyriel were holed up in a small storage room behind Kale's shop. It was cramped, filled with the hum of ventilation fans. They sat on a makeshift mattress, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and ozone. Lyriel was staring at the wall, her hand absent-mindedly stroking the golden light of her belly. I am terrified, she said quietly. Eli looked up from cleaning his pistol. Of the hunters? No, Lyriel said. Of myself. She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I grew up in a palace made of ice. Eli. My mother was a queen first and a parent second. She looked at me and saw a duty, a succession plan. She loved me, I think, but she could never just hold me. She shuddered, the glow on her skin flickering. What if I am like her? What if I look at this child and I only see a political tool? What if I cannot be warm? I do not know how to be a mother, Eli. I only know how to be a princess. Eli set the pistol down. He moved across the mattress and pulled her into his arms. He held her tightly, pressing her head against his chest. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and steady. You are terrified. You are angry. You are running across the galaxy in a rust bucket shuttle and eating greasy eggs in a basement just to keep this kid safe. He pulled back to look at her. Does that sound cold to you? Does that sound like duty? Lyriel searched his face. No. You are already a better mother than you think, Eli said. You worry. That is the job description. My mom worried so much she went gray at 30. He kissed her forehead, then her lips. It was a slow, deep kiss, a reaffirmation of the bond that had started this madness. We figure it out, Eli promised against her lips. You teach the kid how to float, and I will teach them how to throw a punch. We balance each other out. Lyriel melted against him, the fear receding, replaced by the profound, grounding comfort of his presence. They lay together in the dark, bodies tangled, finding solace in the heat of their skin and the steady rhythm of the new life pulsing between them. It was a moment of peace stolen from the eye of the hurricane. It ended with the sound of a door being kicked in. The front of Kale's shop exploded inward. Movement! Eli roared, rolling off the mattress and dragging Lyriel with him. He kicked over a heavy table just as a plasma bolt scorched the air where they had been lying. "Kyle!" Lyriel screamed. The old healer appeared in the doorway, shouting something in ancient Sarathai, before a stun baton took him down. Armored figures poured into the room. They wore matte black armor with no markings, earth black ops. But flanked behind them were lithe, shimmering figures in stealth suits, Sarathai cartel assassins. The conspiracy had found them together. "Back door," Eli shouted. He fired 3 rapid shots, the heavy rounds punching through the armor of the lead human operative. He didn't wait to see him fall. He grabbed Lyriel and shoved her toward the ventilation hatch Kale had showed them earlier. They scrambled into the maintenance tunnels. The air was hot and smelled of ozone. Behind them, they heard the shouts of the hunters. "They are in the vents! Flush them out!" The chase spilled out into the neon-lit alleys of the market deck. It was a nightmare of flashing lights and screaming civilians. Eli and Lyriel ran. Lyriel was heavy. Her center of balance shifted, but she moved with a desperate, feral determination. She kept one hand clamped over her stomach, the bio-lattice shield flaring bright enough to deflect a stray laser blast that grazed her side. Eli was a whirlwind of violence. He shot out a steam pipe to scald their pursuers. He threw a flashbang grenade into a cluster of mercenaries. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting to buy seconds. "They cornered us!" Lyriel gasped as they reached a dead end, a massive cargo lift that was currently deactivated. Above them, on the catwalks. The assassins appeared. Eli looked around. He saw a control panel for the gravity plating. "Hold on to something!" he yelled. He shot the control panel. The gravity in the alley inverted. Screams erupted as crates, debris, and mercenaries fell up toward the ceiling. Lyriel, prepared by Eli's warning, had grabbed a stanchion. She hung sideways, her hair streaming toward the roof. Eli grabbed her waist, his magnetic boots locking onto the wall. "Walk," he ordered. They ran along the vertical surface of the wall, crossing the gap to the docking bay while their enemies floundered in zero-G chaos. It was disorienting, nauseating, and brilliant. They burst into the docking bay where the stray was waiting. But they were not alone. A Sarathai assassin dropped from the ceiling, landing directly on the shuttle's ramp. He held a curved energy blade. "You cannot run," the assassin hissed. "The cycle must be closed." Eli raised his pistol, but it clicked empty. He cursed and drew his combat knife. "Get inside," he told Lyriel. "I am not leaving you. Start the engines," Eli roared, shoving her toward the airlock. He charged the assassin. It was a mismatch of speed against brute force. The assassin slashed, cutting a deep gash across Eli's chest plate, but Eli didn't stop. He slammed his metal shoulder into the alien, knocking him backward. They grappled on the ramp, the assassin's blade inching toward Eli's throat. Suddenly, a bolt of violet energy slammed into the assassin's chest. He flew backward, crashing to the deck. Eli looked back. Lyriel stood in the airlock, her hand raised, smoke curling from her fingers. She had not used a weapon. She had channeled the raw bioenergy of the pregnancy into a concussive blast. She looked terrifying, a goddess of vengeance with a glowing sun in her womb. "Get in!" she screamed. Eli scrambled aboard. The airlock hissed shut. The shuttle blasted out of the dock just as the station's defense turrets began to track them. "Where are we going?" Eli shouted, strapping into the pilot's seat. "They are blocking the hyperspace lanes." "The rift," Lyriel said, punching in the coordinates Kale had given them. Kale said there is a spatial fracture in Sector 9. It is unstable, but it leads to the old temple worlds. "That is suicide," Eli said. "A rift that size will tear this ship apart." "It is that or the firing squad," Lyriel said grimly. Sensors showed a dozen ships closing in, Earth interceptors and Sarathai cruisers. Eli looked at the tactical map. He looked at Lyriel. "Hold on," he said. "This is going to get bumpy." He threw the throttle forward. The Stray accelerated toward a swirling vortex of distorted starlight at the edge of the system. The rift. The ship shook violently as they hit the event horizon. Reality outside the viewport fractured into a kaleidoscope of colors, impossible purples, screaming greens. The hull groaned, metal twisting under the gravitational shear. Lyriel reached out and grabbed Eli's hand. The cockpit was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "If we die," she whispered, her voice fierce over the roar of the engines, "we die as a family. We die free." Eli squeezed her hand. "We are not dying today. Princess." He pushed the engines to 120%. The shuttle screamed, and then silence. They burst out of the other side of the rift. The kaleidoscope vanished, replaced by the serene, silent darkness of a nebula. Clouds of rose and gold gas swirled around them. The alarms were blaring. Engine failure. Life support failing. "We made it." Eli gasped, wrestling the dead stick. Below them, a planet emerged from the mist. It was a world of overgrown forests and ancient stone spires, a lost Sarathai temple world. "We are crashing," Eli announced calmly. "Brace for impact." The shuttle tumbled through the atmosphere, trailing smoke. Eli fought the controls, managing to pull the nose up at the last second. They skidded across the canopy of the forest, branches snapping like gunfire before slamming into a clearing of soft moss. The silence that followed was ringing. Eli groaned, unbuckling his harness. "Lyriel, I am whole," she wheezed. The shield protected the baby. They stumbled out of the wreckage. The air was sweet and rich with oxygen. The temple spires rose in the distance, silent and waiting. But they were not alone. A shadow fell over them. Eli drew his knife, swaying on his feet. A ship was descending through the clouds. It was not a black ops vessel. It was not a cartel raider. It was a sleek, silver yacht of royal design, shaped like a falling teardrop. It bore the crest of the ascendant sun. Eli tensed. "Is that them? Did they find us?" Lyriel looked at the ship. She saw the markings. She felt the resonance of the mind aboard. "No," she whispered, clutching Eli's arm. "It is not the hunters." The ship landed with a whisper of engines. The ramp lowered. Standing at the top, flanked by a heavy guard, was Queen Sarah. She looked regal, terrifying, and terrified. "Mother." Lyriel breathed. The queen ran down the ramp. She didn't look like a monarch. She looked like a woman who had crossed hell to find something she lost. Lyriel and Eli stood their ground, broken, bleeding, and defiant, waiting to see if they had been saved, or if they had just run into the arms of the ultimate judge. The atmosphere of the hidden temple world was not merely air. It was a suspension of mist, memory, and ancient silence. The planet, known in the oldest star charts only as the Cradle, lay wrapped in a nebula of bruising purples and golds, shielding it from the prying sensors of the galaxy. Here, the trees were tall pillars of fossilized wood that wept sap smelling of myrrh, and the ruins that rose from the forest floor were grown from living crystal, humming with a song that had started before humanity discovered fire. The Dawn Treader, Queen Sarah's personal corvette, descended through the canopy like a silver needle stitching the clouds together. It did not land with the roar of thrusters but settled with a harmonic resonance that caused the mossy ground to ripple outward in concentric circles. From the wreckage of their crashed shuttle, Eli Ward and Princess Lyriel watched the royal ship touch down. Eli stood in front of Lyriel, his combat knife drawn. His weight shifted onto his good leg. He was bleeding, exhausted, and filthy. But he looked at the sleek Sarathai vessel with the cold calculation of a wolf watching a hunter. Lyriel gripped his arm, her knuckles white. Her biolattice was pulsing rapidly, a chaotic rhythm of gold and distress that lit up the misty clearing. "If she comes out with guards," Eli rasped, his voice low. "I take the queen. You run for the trees." "There is no running." "Eli," Lyriel whispered, leaning heavily against him. Her labor pains had begun during the crash, sharp and rhythmic, tearing through her abdomen. "This is the end of the line." The ramp of the Dawn Treader hissed open. There were no legions of stormtroopers. There were no armored sentinels. There was only a single figure. Queen Asera walked down the ramp. She was not wearing her ceremonial armor or the heavy jeweled cape of state. She wore a simple tunic of gray silk, and her hair, usually sculpted into severe geometries, hung loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller than Eli remembered. She stopped 10 paces away, her eyes ancient and terrified, swept over the wreckage, over the blood on Eli's coat, and finally landed on her daughter. Asera's gaze dropped to the swollen, glowing curve of Lyriel's stomach. The queen's hand went to her mouth, stifling a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Lyri," Asera whispered. It was not the title. It was the name she had used when Lyriel was a child, learning to shape light in the palace gardens. Lyriel straightened her spine. It cost her a gasp of pain, but she refused to cower. "You found us," Lyriel said, her voice shaking but clear. "Did you come to finish what your council started?" Asera took a step forward, her hands reaching out, empty and trembling. "I did not know," the queen said. The words tumbled out, stripped of royal cadence. "They told me the outpost was destroyed. They told me it was a failure. When I found the logs, when I saw the scan." She looked at Eli, and for the first time, there was no disdain in her eyes. There was only a profound, bewildered gratitude. "You kept her alive," Asera said to the human. "I kept them alive," Eli corrected, not lowering his knife. Asera flinched, the plural stinging her. She looked back at Lyriel, seeing the fierce feral light in her daughter's eyes. A look Lyriel had never possessed in the safety of the capital. "I was wrong," Asera confessed, her voice cracking. "I looked at you and I saw a problem to be solved. I saw a dying lineage. I did not see my child. I was so afraid of our extinction that I became the very thing that was killing us. Cold. Calculated." She took another step, tears spilling onto her pale cheeks. "I am not here as your queen, Lyriel. I am here as your mother. Please, let me help." Lyriel looked at the woman who had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years, now standing in the mud, begging. The anger that had fueled Lyriel across 3 sectors did not vanish, but it softened, making room for the pain that was ripping her apart from the inside. "This child is not a tool." "Mother," Lyriel said, her voice fierce, "it was not made in a lab. It was made in love, and I will not let you, or the council, or Earth, touch it unless you swear to me that it will never be a symbol. It will just be a child. I swear it." Asera wept, dropping to her knees in the moss. "I swear it on the ascendant sun." Lyriel let out a cry as a contraction seized her, her knees buckling. "Lyri!" Eli shouted, catching her before she hit the ground. Asera was there in an instant, moving with a speed that belied her age. She placed her hands on Lyriel's stomach, her own biolattice flaring to sync with her daughter's. "She is in transition," Asera said, her eyes widening. "The hybrid energy. It is accelerating the process. The babies are coming. Now." "Babies?" Eli choked out. "Plural? There is no time," Asera commanded, her voice snapping back to authority, though now it was directed at saving them. "Get her to the temple. The resonance chambers can stabilize her." But before they could move, the sky above them screamed. The mist shredded as high-velocity entry pods slammed into the atmosphere. Dark, angular shapes blocked out the nebula's light. Cartel ships, Eli growled, looking up, and human stealth frigates. They tracked the same anomaly you did. The silence of the temple world was shattered by the whine of charging plasma cannons. "Get her inside!" Asera yelled at Eli. The queen stood up. She turned toward her ship and the approaching enemy. She raised her hands, and the bio-lattice on her arms flared with a blinding white light. She did not draw a weapon. She spoke to the planet. "Awaken!" The ground beneath their feet rumbled. The ancient crystalline spires that rose from the forest began to sing, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. Beams of prismatic light shot up from the temple ruins, forming a shimmering, impenetrable dome over the clearing. Ghostly shapes rose from the forest floor, spectral drones left by the ancestors, shaped like birds of prey made of hard light. They shrieked and ascended to meet the incoming ships. Eli scooped Lyriel up in his arms. He ran toward the largest of the structures, a cathedral of translucent stone that glowed with a soft, inviting pulse. "Don't you die on me," Eli grunted as he ran. "You hear me, princess? You do not get to die on the finish line." Lyriel gripped his shirt, her face buried in his neck. "I am not dying," she gasped. "I am becoming inside the temple." The air was cool and smelled of ozone and petrichor. The architecture was not built, it was grown. The walls curved organically, pulsing with a bioluminescence that matched the rhythm of Lyriel's distress. Eli carried her to the central dais, a raised platform of smooth, warm crystal. As he laid her down, the crystal reacted to her presence. It softened, molding to her shape, rising up to form a protective, cocoon-like structure around her lower body. Asera stood at the massive archway of the temple entrance, looking back at them. "I will hold the line," the queen shouted over the roar of explosions outside. "The defenses are old, but so am I." She turned her back on them, facing the onslaught, a lone figure of light against a tide of darkness. Inside the chamber, the world narrowed down to the space between Eli and Lyriel. The pain was unlike anything Lyriel had ever imagined. It was not just physical, it was energetic. The hybrid life inside her was drawing on the ambient energy of the temple, acting as a conduit between the ancient technology and her own biology. Her skin was so bright it was hard to look at, shimmering with waves of gold and violet. "Eli," she screamed, clutching his hand, "it feels like I am burning." Eli held her hand in both of his, the flesh and the metal. He wiped the sweat from her forehead with his sleeve. He was terrified. He had seen men blown apart by artillery. He had seen ships burn in the void. He had never been scared like this. "You are okay," he said, his voice shaking. "You are doing it. Look at me, Lyri, look at me." He locked eyes with her, anchoring her drifting consciousness. "Remember the gym?" he asked, desperate to distract her. "Remember when you kicked my ass in 0G? You are the toughest thing I have ever met. You are a Sarathai warrior princess and you are married to a Deathworld grunt. This is nothing." Lyriel laughed, but it turned into a scream as another wave hit her. The temple lights flared in sympathy, turning a deep, alarming red. "The energy is too high," Lyriel gasped. They are too strong. They are tearing me apart." Eli leaned in close, his forehead pressing against hers. "Let them out," he whispered. "Don't fight it. Let the energy flow. I am here. I am grounding you." He focused on the connection they had forged in the neural sync. He opened his mind, inviting the overflow of her pain and fear into himself. He felt it hit him like a physical blow, the searing heat, the terror, but he held firm. He was the rock. He was the anchor. Outside, the battle raged. The sky was a chaotic tapestry of laser fire and exploding drones. Asera stood on the temple steps, weaving shields of hard light with her hands, deflecting bombardment that would have leveled a city. She was exhausted, her reserves draining, but she fought with the fury of a grandmother protecting the future. But inside, the climax had arrived. With a final, earth-shattering cry, Lyriel arched back against the crystal dais. The room exploded in white light. It was not blinding. It was clarifying. It washed through Eli, through the stone, through the very air. And then, silence, broken by a cry, a thin, high wail that sounded like the tearing of the fabric of reality. Eli looked down. Resting in the curve of Lyriel's arm was a child, small, wet, and perfect. But it was glowing. Its skin held a faint pearlescent shimmer, and its eyes, when they blinked open, were solid gold. A girl. Eli choked out, tears streaming down his scarred face. But Lyriel was not done. Another wave, shorter this time, but just as intense. The crystal hummed a lower note, and then a second cry joined the first. A boy. He was louder, his cry resonating with a bass note that shook the dust from the ceiling. His skin was darker, more like Eli's, but traced with faint blue latticework that was already visible. Twins, Lyriel whispered, her voice a thread of smoke. She slumped back, utterly spent, her light dimming to a soft, exhausted pulse. Eli stared at them. They were impossibly small. He reached out a finger, terrified he would break them. The boy reached up and grabbed Eli's metal finger. The contact sent a shockwave through the room. It wasn't electricity. It was pure, distilled vitality. The temple groaned. The lights in the walls shifted from amber to a brilliant, healthy white. The low hum of the machinery spiked, changing from a dirge to a triumphant major key. Outside, the shield dome over the clearing, which had been flickering under the heavy bombardment, suddenly solidified. It turned from a translucent barrier to an opaque wall of golden force. The impact of the cartel missiles didn't just bounce off. They were absorbed, the energy converted into light. Asera, who had been staggering under the strain, gasped. She felt a surge of power rush into her back, flowing from the temple into her veins. Her gray skin flushed with color. The ache in her joints vanished. It was as if she had just slept for a century in a healing trance. She turned, staring at the temple entrance. She knew. The cartel ships, sensing the shift in power, redoubled their fire, but it was useless. The planet itself was rejecting them now. The trees were lashing out with vine-like tendrils, swatting drones from the sky. Asera lowered her hands. The battle was not over, but the temple was holding. She turned and ran inside. When she entered the chamber, she stopped dead. The scene was a tableau of exhaustion and miracle. Lyriel lay on the dais, her hair plastered to her skull, holding one child. Eli sat on the floor beside her, holding the other, looking at the bundle in his arms with a mixture of terror and absolute adoration. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with ozone and life. Asera walked forward slowly. Her boots clicked on the crystal floor. Lyriel looked up. She smiled, tired and triumphant. "Come meet your grandchildren." "Mother," she whispered. Asera approached the dais. She reached out a trembling hand toward the girl in Lyriel's arms. "May I?" she asked, her voice humble. Lyriel nodded. Asera picked up the child. The baby was warm, heavier than a Sarathai infant, dense with human bone and muscle. The baby opened her eyes, gold meeting violet. Asera felt it instantly. The genetic code of the child was singing. It wasn't the stagnant, repetitive song of the Sarathai. It was a jazz improvisation, chaotic, beautiful, and endlessly adaptable. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. She touched the baby's cheek, and a spark jumped between them. Sarah gasped as she felt her own dormant reproductive markers, dead for 1,000 years, twitch in sympathy. It wasn't that she could bear children again, but that the concept of fertility had been reintroduced to her biology. She sank to her knees, clutching the child to her chest, weeping openly. "I gave my infertile daughter to a human," she murmured, the words shaking with disbelief. "I gave her away to save us, and the grandchildren are rewriting our fate." Eli stood up, holding the boy. He looked at the queen, then at Lyriel. "They are doing something to the temple," Eli said, nodding at the walls. "Look." The crystalline structures were growing. New facets were crystallizing in real time. The information streams on the walls were scrolling so fast they were a blur. Genetic data, historical archives, repair protocols. "They are the key," Lyriel said softly. Kale was right. Their biosignature. "It is a command code. They are unlocking the systems we lost the ability to control." Sarah looked up, her face wet with tears, but her eyes burning with a new fire. "They are the cure," she said. "Not just for the fading, but for the stagnation. They are the bridge between the old and the new." But the moment of wonder was cut short by a warning chime from Eli's tactical display on his wrist. "Proximity alert," he hissed. "Internal sensors." He handed the boy to Lyriel and drew his knife, stepping in front of the dais. "They are inside," he said. "The cartel knew they couldn't breach the main shield. So they had sent a ground team to infiltrate through the old catacombs beneath the temple, a weakness in the ancient design that the predictive systems had just highlighted, but too late to seal. A section of the far wall dissolved, not exploded. Dissolved. Nanite acid ate through the crystal in seconds. 6 figures stepped through the breach. They were not standard soldiers. They were elites, human mercenaries in powered exoskeletons flanked by Serathi void walkers. They moved with silent, deadly precision. The leader, a human with a cybernetic jaw, stepped forward. He leveled a heavy pulse rifle at the dais. "Secure the assets," the leader commanded, his voice amplified and metallic. "Kill the adults." Eli stood alone between the squad and his family. He was wounded, exhausted, and armed only with a knife. Sarah stood up. She handed the baby back to Lyriel. She stepped up beside Eli. She raised her hands, glowing with the renewed power of the temple. "You will not touch them," the queen said, her voice echoing with the force of a collapsing star. The leader sneered, "Fire!" The part ended on the frozen image of muzzle flashes lighting up the dim chamber, Eli lunging forward with a roar, and the queen unleashing a storm of light, while behind them. Lyriel curled around her children, the twins' eyes glowing as they prepared to unleash a power the galaxy had never seen. The interior of the temple was no longer a place of worship. It was a kaleidoscope of violence. The ancient sentient crystal that formed the walls of the corridors was screaming. Every time a plasma bolt struck the translucent surfaces, the impact did not result in a shatter, but a resonant bell-like tone that vibrated in the teeth of every combatant. The air smelled of ozone, burning synthetic armor, and the distinct pine-sharp scent of the temple's own defensive pheromones. Captain Eli Ward moved through this chaotic symphony with a terrifying rhythmic efficiency. He was no longer fighting for a flag or a paycheck. He was fighting for the small, warm weight strapped to his chest. He had fashioned a makeshift harness from the webbing of his tactical vest and a strip of Lyriel's silk robe. Inside it, nestled against his beating heart, was his son. The infant was swaddled tight, his tiny head protected by the curve of Eli's heavy pectoral plate. "Keep your head down, kid." Eli grunted, sliding across the polished floor to avoid a burst of suppression fire. A stealth-cloaked assassin materialized from the distortion of the air 3 meters ahead. The Sarathai killer raised a monomolecular blade, aiming for the gap in Eli's armor. Eli did not shoot. He didn't have the angle. Instead, he slammed his metal hand against a glowing glyph on the wall. "Floor," Eli commanded. The temple responded to the trace of hybrid biosignature that clung to Eli from his contact with the children. The floor beneath the assassin liquefied, turning from solid crystal to a viscous gel. The killer plunged waist-deep into the ground before the material hardened instantly, trapping him in stone. Eli stepped past the immobilized assassin and delivered a single, brutal blow to the helmet with the butt of his empty rifle. "This is not what a normal baby's first day looks like," Eli muttered to the bundle on his chest as he reloaded. "Usually there is more crying and less active camouflage." The baby did not cry. The boy stared up at Eli's chin with wide, golden eyes, seeming to track the movement of the laser sights dancing on the walls. Deeper in the sanctum, Lyriel was fighting a different kind of war. She was weak, her body trembling from the trauma of the birth and the immense energy expenditure. She sat at the base of a singing pillar, cradling her daughter, but she was not helpless. The bond between Lyriel and the female twin was immediate and psychic. It felt like a live wire running from her mind directly into the temple's central operating system. The baby was a skeleton key. Lyriel closed her eyes, visualizing the corridor ahead where a squad of cartel mercenaries was advancing on Asera's flank. "Close," Lyriel whispered to the child. The baby cooed, a soft, gurgling sound. 50 meters away, a massive slab of crystal slammed down from the ceiling, sealing the corridor and cutting the mercenary squad in half. Lyriel gasped, feeling the drain on her reserves. It was intoxicating. For a century, she had been the broken princess, the one who could not interface with the deepest layers of Sarathai tech because her biology was considered a dead end. Now, through her daughter, she was the temple itself. She saw a sniper positioning himself on a high balcony, aiming at her mother. Lyriel focused. Refract. The air around the sniper twisted. The light bent. When he fired, the laser bolt curved 90 degrees and slammed into the wall next to him, blowing him off his perch. "My brave girl," Lyriel murmured, kissing the infant's forehead. "You are already a queen." The battle converged on the central hall, a cavernous space where the ceiling was a holographic projection of the galaxy as it had looked 10,000 years ago. Queen Asera stood in the center of the room. Her honor guard, battered and dwindling, formed a circle around her. But the queen was not hiding. She was waiting. At the far end of the hall, the blast doors hissed open. Lord Valor stepped through. He was flanked by heavy assault droids and the leader of the human Black Ops team. Valor looked impeccable, his crimson robes unmarred by the dust of battle. He looked at Asera with a mix of pity and disdain. "It is over." "Asera," Valor called out, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "Surrender the abominations. We can still salvage the dignity of the throne." Asera stepped forward. She was glowing with the energy she had absorbed from the twins, looking younger and more dangerous than she had in a millennium. "Dignity?" Asera asked, her voice cold and hard as a diamond. "Is that what you call selling our future to a cartel? Is that what you call engineering the slow suicide of your own species? It was stability." Valor shouted, losing his composure for a fraction of a second. "We controlled the population. We maintained the balance of power. If you let these hybrids exist, If you let their chaotic genetics spread, the Sarathai will cease to be Sarathai. We will become messy, mortal, diluted. We were already dead. Valor, Asera roared back. We were a beautiful corpse floating in space. These children are not dilution. They are evolution. She pointed a finger at him. You speak of stability. I speak of life. And I denounce you, Valor of House Varix, as a traitor to the blood. You are no lord. You are a butcher. While the queen held the attention of the room, Eli was moving in the shadows of the upper colonnade. He reached a service junction, a bundle of optic cables that pulsed with the temple's outgoing transmissions. He pulled a device from his belt, a chaotic mess of human wires and Sarathai crystals he had jury-rigged on the shuttle. Okay, kid, Eli whispered to the baby on his chest. Daddy is going to pirate the signal. Cover your ears. He jammed the device into the port, on Earth, in the glittering spires of New York and the slums of the orbital habitats. Screens flickered, on Alien Prime, in the grand plazas and the private homes of the nobility. The official state broadcast was overridden. The image that appeared was shaky at first, then stabilized. It showed the central hall of the temple. It showed Lord Valor standing with human mercenaries. And it showed Queen Asera, standing defiant. Then, the camera angle shifted, controlled by Lyriel's mental command. It zoomed in on Eli Ward, stepping out of the shadows with a Sarathai infant strapped to his chest. It panned to Lyriel, glowing with maternal power, holding the other twin, people of the earth and the ascendant. Eli's voice cut through the static, rough and tired. They told you we were dead. They told you the experiment failed. They lied. The image focused on the babies, the golden eyes, the visible, undeniable aura of life that surrounded them. They lied because they wanted to sell you a cure they already had. Eli continued. They wanted to keep you sick. They wanted to keep you afraid of each other. On the screen. Valor turned, realizing too late that the cameras were rolling, his face twisted in a snarl of pure malice. Kill them! Valor shrieked. Kill them all! The galaxy watched as the polished noble lord ordered the execution of infants on Earth, in the Situation Room. Director Holloway watched the feed. Her face went gray. The narrative she had carefully constructed, that humans were the victims of alien arrogance, that the hybrids were monsters, collapsed in real time. The monsters were the ones in the suits. In the streets of the Sarathai capital, the silence broke. A roar of fury went up from the populace. They saw their queen fighting for a human. They saw a human fighting for their future. The illusion of separation shattered. Back in the temple, the final push began. The mercenaries, realizing their secrecy was gone and their paymasters were exposed, decided to end it. They charged. Hold the line, Asera commanded, raising a shield of light, but there were too many of them. The droids unleashed a torrent of plasma. The human soldiers advanced with flamethrowers. Lyriel looked at Eli across the hall. They locked eyes. They didn't need words. They needed the twins. Together! Lyriel screamed. Eli placed his hand on his son's back. Lyriel clutched her daughter. They stepped forward, past the shields of the honor guard, into the open kill zone. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Lyriel and Eli didn't fire. They focused. They poured all their love, all their fear, all their desperate hope into the tiny, potent conduits in their arms. The twins cried out in unison. It was not a sound of distress, and it was a resonance frequency. A wave of visible energy rippled outward from the center of the hall. It was a soft, shimmering gold, moving like a slow tide. When it hit the droids, their logic cores froze. They slumped over, lights dimming. When it hit the human soldiers, their cybernetic targeting implants sparked and shut down. Their smart guns, unable to lock onto the unique biosignature of the hybrids, locked their triggers. When it hit the Serathai Voidwalkers, they dropped their weapons. They fell to their knees, clutching their heads, overwhelmed by a sudden, intense feeling of connection, a biological imperative that overrode their conditioning. They were feeling the presence of the future, and their bodies refused to destroy it. The enemy was not slaughtered. They were disarmed by the raw, undeniable fact of life. The hall fell silent, save for the hum of the crystal and the soft whimpering of the confused soldiers. Eli walked forward, the gold light fading from his skin. He walked up to the leader of the Black Ops team, who was frantically pulling the trigger of a dead rifle. Eli gently reached out and took the rifle from the man's shaking hands. "It is over," Eli said quietly. "Go home." Lord Valor stood alone. His droids were dead. His allies were neutralized. He looked at Asera, then at the twins. He saw the end of his world. He did not fight. He simply collapsed, a hollow man whose time had passed. The aftermath was a blur of treaties and tribunals, but for Lyriel and Eli, it was background noise. The emergency councils met on neutral ground. The evidence was overwhelming. The biotechnological cartel was dismantled, its leaders arrested by their own people. The blockade around the temple world was lifted. But the most important victory was the science. The healers confirmed it. The genetic pattern of the twins, a unique synthesis of human adaptability and Serathai longevity, could be synthesized into a retroviral treatment. It wouldn't make Serathai human, and it wouldn't make humans immortal. But it would unlock the genetic dampeners. It was a cure. And at Lyriel's insistence, supported by the Queen, it was declared a public good. No patents, no corporations. It was distributed freely to any clinic that asked. 6 months later, the temple world was no longer a war zone. It was a sanctuary. The scars on the forest had healed, covered in rapid growth moss. The crystal ruins had been stabilized and turned into a home. Lyriel sat on a stone terrace overlooking a valley of singing trees. The air was warm and sweet. She was wearing loose, comfortable linen, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She was nursing the girl, Ilara. The baby suckled contentedly, her tiny hand resting on Lyriel's chest, her skin glowing with a faint, happy pearl light, a few feet away, on a patch of soft grass. Eli was lying on his back. He was holding the boy, Kalen, up in the air with his flesh hand and his metal hand. "Who is a terrifying monster?" Eli cooed, making a grotesque face that scrunched up his scar. "You are. Yes, you are. You are a little void terror." Kalen giggled, a sound like wind chimes, and kicked his legs. A small burst of telekinetic energy hiccuped out of him, lifting a few pebbles off the ground. "Careful." Eli laughed. "Put the rocks down, pal. We do not throw rocks at Dad." Lyriel watched them, a profound peace settling in her chest. It felt foreign, this lack of anxiety. For 100 years, she had woken up every day preparing for disappointment. Now, she woke up to drool and laughter. A shadow fell over the terrace. Lyriel looked up to see Queen Asera standing there. She was dressed in simple robes, bereft of her crown. She looked awkward, her hands clasped in front of her. She came to the terrace every day, but she still acted like a guest in her own family. "Mother," Lyriel said, smiling. "Come sit." Asera hesitated, then sat on the edge of the stone bench. She looked at Eli rolling on the grass with the boy. "He is vigorous," Asera observed. "He is a menace," Eli called out cheerfully, sitting up and balancing Kalen on his knee. "He chewed on my prosthetic this morning, denting high-grade titanium with baby teeth. That is impressive." Asera looked at Lyriel. then at the baby in her arms. Does she know who I am? Asera asked, her voice small. Lyriel shifted Ilara, turning her so she faced the queen. She knows you are the one who sings to the temple, Lyriel said. She likes your voice. Asera blushed, a rare human reaction. I did not think you heard that. The walls are acoustic. Mother, Lyriel teased. Would you like to hold her? Lyriel offered. Asera stiffened slightly. I do not want to disturb her. I am not. I was never good with small things. I might do it wrong. You are the queen of the Ascendant Empire, Eli said, walking over with Kaelin tucked under his arm like a football. You commanded fleets. I think you can handle a 10-pound baby. Asera looked at Eli. He grinned at her, that crooked, scarred grin that used to terrify her court. Now, it just looked tired and happy. Eli sat down next to her. He didn't ask. He just placed Kaelin in her lap. Watch out for the left hook, Eli warned. He has a mean jab. Asera froze as the boy settled against her silk robes. She held her breath. Kaelin looked up at her, his golden eyes blinking slowly. He reached out a chubby hand and grabbed Asera's index finger. He squeezed. It was a strong grip, assertive, alive. Asera looked down at the small hand wrapped around her finger. The hard lines of her face, etched by centuries of ruling and worrying and scheming, began to soften. Her eyes filled with tears. Hello, she whispered to the boy. Hello, little anomaly. She looked up at Lyriel and Eli. I do not know how to be this, she admitted, her voice shaking. I know how to be a queen. I know how to be a general. I do not know how to be a grandmother. You just sit there and let them drool on you, Eli said, resting his hand on her shoulder. That is pretty much the whole gig. Asera laughed. It was a wet, choked sound, but it was real. She leaned her cheek against the top of Kaelin's head. Thank you, she whispered. That night, the nebula was particularly bright, painting the sky in strokes of violet and burning orange. Eli stood on the high balcony of the temple, leaning against the railing. He was smoking one of his terrible earth cigarettes, the smoke curling up to join the mist. Lyriel stepped out to join him. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against the scarred metal of his back. They are asleep, Eli asked softly. Finally, Lyriel murmured. Ilara levitated her crib again. I had to talk her down. Eli chuckled, covering her hands with his. We are going to have to bolt the furniture to the floor. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the galaxy turn above them. Do you regret it? Lyriel asked suddenly. Eli turned in her arms to face her. Regret what? Giving up your life, your commission. You are stuck here, Eli, on a temple world with a former princess and 2 radioactive children. You could have been an admiral by now. You could have been a hero on Earth. Eli looked at her. He reached up and touched the biolattice under her eye, which was now a steady, calm blue. Lyriel, before I met you, I was a ghost. I went from war to war, waiting for the one that would finally kill me. I didn't have a life. I had a service record. He tossed the cigarette over the railing. I spent 40 years surviving without a reason, he said. Just stubbornness and spite. Now, he gestured to the room behind them, where the twins were sleeping, and then he cupped her face in his hands. Now I have 3 reasons. I have a home. I have you. Lyriel leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. It is going to be hard, she whispered. The galaxy is still dangerous. People will still stare. Let them stare, Eli said. Let them come. We beat an empire and a cartel with a shuttle and a prayer. We can handle the rest. He kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of the shuttle escape. It wasn't the fiery, angry kiss of the gym. It was deep, slow, and settled. It tasted of smoke and ozone and promise. It was the kiss of two people who had stopped running and started building. When they pulled apart, Lyriel rested her forehead against his. "We are a family," she said. "Yeah," Eli smiled. "We are." The camera pulled back, leaving the couple on the balcony, rising up through the mist, up through the atmosphere, spanning out across the stars. We saw glimpses of the new galaxy. We saw a fertility clinic on a Sarathai colony world. The waiting room was full, the lights warm. A Sarathai woman wept with joy as she held a positive test result, the hybrid cure coursing through her veins. We saw a laboratory on Earth, where human and Sarathai scientists worked side by side, arguing over equations not with malice, but with the frantic energy of discovery. We saw a public plaza on a trade station, where children of mixed species, some with scales, some with skin, some glowing, some not, chased a ball through a fountain, their laughter mixing in the air. And finally, the view returned to the temple garden, 3 years later. Queen Sarah sat on a bench, reading a data pad. Suddenly, 2 toddlers burst from the bushes. One was floating a few inches off the ground. The other was running with the heavy, stomping gait of a miniature tank. They were laughing, trailing sparks of gold light. "Grandmother, look." They crashed into her legs, burying their faces in her robes. Sarah put down the pad. She looked down at the sticky, glowing, chaotic creatures that had dismantled her dignity and saved her soul. She smiled, a true, radiant smile that made her look not like a statue, but like a woman. She ran her hand through the boy's hair and caught the floating girl by the ankle. She looked up at the sky, shaken and moved even now by the sheer improbability of it all. "I gave my infertile daughter to a human." She whispered to the wind, the words half amused, half reverent. She watched the grandchildren race away again, chasing a butterfly that Eli had sent into the garden, and the grandchildren changed everything.